Why IMF gave a C grade in India's GDP data. Why IMF does not trust India's GDP numbers.
And India grows by a better than expected 8.2% in September quarter, pointing to strong momentum led by manufacturing, construction and a robust services sector.
What India needs to do to correct it and why it is very much the need of the hour. India just posted an impressive 8.2% GDP growth, but IMF is not convinced. Hello everyone, welcome to Vajiram and Ravi's Flash News. My name is Shubhangi Singh and today we are going to discuss that how come after such impressive, surprising numbers, why multilateral agencies, rating agencies and IMF are not convinced, what are the reasons behind it and what does the Indian government has to say about it and how valid all of this is. So starting with understanding what exactly has happened and how it has happened right away. So recently the Q2 GDP growth numbers came up on which we saw on a year to 8.2% growth. Basically this is a 6-quarter high and the surprising fact here is this high has come even before we get to see the impact of GST cut that has been recently put in. Now this frequent surprising GDP numbers have triggered debate amongst economists, rating agencies and also multilateral agencies and IMF in this scenario. So in this very context, what has happened is that IMF, International Monetary Fund, has retained C grade to India's national accounts. The GDP data, the adequacy, accuracy grade that is given by IMF, that has been given as C. And when we are looking at this grade, we will be talking about how it is figured out, but at the same time, this very grade raises very serious concerns about our GDP data, how reliable is that data, how methodologically there can be certain gaps, and especially about the consistency of macro indicators. And this becomes more problematic when we are quoting such big numbers if they are not real, because we are posing that we are a $5 to $7 trillion economy, but this is based on data. And if that data is not reliable, then so this number also comes into the question itself. So before we move into understanding more details about it, first let us start with understanding that how exactly IMF has given this C grade to India. So IMF has this very basic assessment of data adequacy and they basically use this assessment to understand the quality of economic statistics and also the national accounts that are maintained by member states. This is done based on Article 4 consultations by IMF. In this whole assessment, IMF evaluates certain indicators, for example, quality. So in the quality factor, we check the accuracy and reliability of data. For example, timeliness, basically how much time, how quickly or how late the data is released, what is the basic methodology that is used for putting this data and also understanding it. Is it as per the global standards that are maintained or not? And it also considers what kind of sectors that have been covered, are the key sectors being covered or not? What is the consistency? That means does the data set matches the sources or it might be a little different, and it also looks into alignment with the global standards which have been set by SNA 2008, BPSA, all of these. So based on these very factors, there is a very simple grading system that IMF has come with. The grades are given from A to D. A is for the countries where the data is fully adequate, that means it has high quality, it is absolutely timely, it matches the global standards, and definitely D is the lowest where there are serious shortcomings which are being seen and it hinders IMF analysis, major deficiencies are present, discrepancies are present in the data. And just before it lies C grade, where shortcomings are there and it somewhat hampers the surveillance that IMF is trying to do. There are significant gaps or certain weaknesses which require editing, which require change so as to ensure that proper adequate data comes to front. Now in this case, when we talk about what grade our data has gone, that is C. Overall, we have been given B because other indicators, be it CPI, be it fiscal or monetary external sectors, sector related data has been given grade B, but in certain specific sector, that is national accounts data, we have received C. Now, obviously when IMF is giving us this grade, there are certain reasons that have been highlighted. Now that we have understood the whole system, we will be moving to understand why IMF has given us C. So the first reason, the first key concern and the weakness that has been highlighted is the outdated base year. Now when we are looking at the outdated base year, as of now this base year is 2011 and 12. For consumption, for industrial structure, services, all patterns have changed if you compare to 2011-12. We are in 2025, end of 2025. This is almost 14 years old, and base years, because they are an important fundamental for understanding the data, comparing the data, understanding a nominal and real GDP. This is something that does not make sense. So base year should be updated every 5 years, and this is 14 years old. This has been raised as a first serious concern. Second, deflator issues. When we are talking about India, India uses wholesale price index, whereas the global practice is about producers price index, which is the global standards, and because of this it leads to wrong real GDP estimation. Furthermore, if we get to see the informal sector, which forms a huge part of our economy, the coverage of this particular sector is not appropriate enough. India's informal sector is around 45 to 50% of the output, 80% of the jobs, and the estimation that we do for the informal sector is proxy based. So the accuracy is highly limited in this scenario as well. It can be accentuated and it can be diminished also, in whichever way the data will be used in terms of proxy. Other than that, there are other concerns such as census delay. So we are supposed to have our census every 10 years. Last census was conducted in 2011. Next one was supposed to happen in 2021, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it got delayed. And the demographic weights, basically when you are looking at growth, you also need to see how many people that growth is catering to. Just simplifying you, if the growth is 10 rupees and people are going 100x, then that growth does not make sense. So population weights, demographic weights become very important. It affects the workforce, it affects the supply, it affects the demand, consumption and poverty, as well as sectoral mapping. And another thing that has been highlighted as a concern by IMF is about the fiscal data. The problem with the fiscal data that has been highlighted, that they are inconsistent. For example, when the center is showing the data and when the state is showing the data, they are not consolidated timely, and it hampers the assessment that are done for the fiscal deficit understanding. So there is no clear picture to understand which is right and what is wrong. So these are the certain major concerns that have been highlighted by IMF, but there is another set of problem, that is the fact that IMF is not doing this for the first time. IMF has already been skeptical. If you talk about the 2015 GDP series revision that was done by our economy, in which India got a new methodology. What was part of this new methodology? They changed their database. Now they are using MCA 21 corporate data by Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Before this, they used to use the factory level data, and that is why, because of the change of the source of data, we saw higher GDP growth estimates, major revisions of the past existing data, and also a huge diversion between expenditure related GDP calculation, expenditure method GDP calculation and production method GDP calculation. All in all, it led to a huge chaos and confusion between economists and also multilateral organization. As I said, this is not the first thing that IMF has highlighted. This was highlighted before. Another thing that has been highlighted is the fact back in 2015 that large revisions that are being done and also the discrepancies that are coming, they complicate the whole analysis, and that is why there have been consistent observations by IMF and multilateral organization in the last 9 to 10 years that rebasing GDP is required. You need to update the CPI, that is consumer price index, necessarily move to producer price index, and also improve the surveys on the basis of which data is collected and then processed accordingly. Now, when we have understood all the concerns that have been coming from IMF, now let us move to understand that how exactly GDP is calculated, and then understand what government is saying on this very end. So, when we talk about calculation of GDP, gross domestic product, which basically helps us in understanding the national income, which is one way of calculating national income, we get to see it in 3 different methods. The first method is production approach, in which GDP is calculated, where we first calculate the gross value added plus taxes, and then we deduct the subsidies. Now, the gross value added is measured for sectors like agriculture, industry, services, but the problem here is in this particular method, again, the informal sector. Now, because informal sector exists, it partially estimates, and here we use extrapolations and proxies, which gives us not so appropriate result in this scenario. The second method that we have is the expenditure method, where the gross domestic product is equal to the consumption expenditure that has been made, the investment expenditure that has been made, the government expenditure that exists, and then we have net exports, that is exports minus imports. Now, in this scenario, we have also seen that there has been a divergence between what we get as a result from expenditure based and the method, production method that I showed you. And if the country is same, if the total output is same in terms of goods and services, there should be not a huge divergence between the methods and the output that is coming. The last method, which is limitedly used, is the income approach. Because of the data limitations, it is not used much. In this, we use salaries, profits and mixed income to calculate and come to the GDP. But as I said, it is not majorly used. Now, in this context that we have understood this, now let us understand, because now you have a fair basis to understand that why GDP numbers are surprising and changing so quickly, the estimates are changing so quickly. So, the first reason here is rapid structural shifts that we are seeing in our country. GST was introduced, then formalization took place because of GST, then digital economy recently has grown so rapidly, MSME closures, new registration and the volatility in manufacturing. So, these structural shifts across the sectors are responsible for surprising and a little inconsistent numbers that we see in GDP. Another thing, weak but high frequency indicators. For example, if we talk about IIP, which shows us the basket in terms of industrial production, index of industrial production, the basket, the weights that are included in that are outdated. They need to be changed with time. If we talk about WPI, that is wholesale price index, that is not aligned with the real time pricing, the actual pricing that is going on, and that is why it is important that we switch towards PPI. Furthermore, we also get to see the large informal sector, the proxy based estimation, and that is what all leads to the mismatch in terms of the GDP estimates in front of us and what ground indicators look like. And in this context, the Indian government has said that yes, we understand there are certain issues, but work is ongoing to modernize the statistical architecture. We will improve on it. New GDP as well as CPI series is supposed to be launched in the very next year. And furthermore, they have talked about that we will work on granular and broader databases through GSTN, through the corporate filings, better household surveys, digital economy mapping, and we will also push to integrate state finances faster. All in all, the government has said that the work IMF marks as a concerned thing, we are already working on that, and that should have been taken into the consideration, and this reform, the idea that we are bringing in reform should have got us a better ranking. Now in this context, these are the major things that are coming up to make sure that our statistical architecture improves in coming time. For example, as I said, new GDP series where the base year will change to 2022 to 23 will be launched next year. So we will have updated industry weights, better service estimation will be there, better informal sector methodology will be there, and also hopefully producer price index based deflators will also be taken into consideration. New CPI series is being introduced with base year 2024 so that we can have a proper recent consumption survey. It will have a better baskets of goods where we will have digital services included, and it will also have updated rural and urban weights included. With these changes and more, like new IIP index for industrial production with the base year of 2020-23, there will be modern manufacturing representation, electronics, EVs, renewables will be included in the basket, which is a problem, and there is assurance of monthly balance of payment as well, so that currently what is being done every 3 months, it happens monthly, and it increases not just transparency but also alignment with the global standards. All in all, what IMF has raised as a concern is not a crisis situation, it is a wake-up call so as to work better towards the 2026 reforms that we are bringing in. On this note, I will be leaving you with a practice question. You can put down your answers in the comment section. Now coming for the answer for yesterday's question, the correct answer here is A. That was all from my side. Thank you so much.